Hello and welcome to Crafting with a View, and for today's tips and tricks tutorial, we're going to talk a little bit about the different types of inks that are out there. And while they all seem to be the same, they're not, because there are slightly differences between the type of ink and what you're using them for. So let's have a look at three different sections. One would be our regular exclusive inks, and this includes the reinkers for those two. They're water-based dye inks. So this is one category we're gonna look into, the regular water-based inks. We also have the exclusive pigment-based inks, and I will show you the difference and what you can do with those and what you should be aware of if you're using them. And then there's always the same question about the black inks. And I have a little chart here that I try and see if I can put this online later too for you. We have our regular black ink, which I have here, which is just your plain water-based ink that you can use for outline stamping on anything. If you're going into coloring, wanting to watercolor things, or using your alcohol markers, anything where you might gonna get in touch with your outline, you want to be very careful. There is a way to use just a plain old regular ink and do your watercolors and do your alcohol marker coloring, but that will be discussed in a tutorial later on, which is called coloring, where I can show you a few things. If you are if you don't want to be too careful, or you say, well, you know, I don't want to risk it, there is one way. If you want to use, for example, the Intense Black Exclusive Ink, which is it doesn't smear, it's solvent, it's a permanent ink, it's waterproof, and it's fast drying. This equals our formerly known Memento that we used to have in the catalog, but then we came up with our own one. I still use that one because I still have so much of it. But if you're looking for something where you can use your watercolors with, this is a great one to use. Or for your alcohol markers, either or. Then we have the StazOn, and we talked about StazOn a little bit beforehand too in another tutorial. This is fast drying, but it is a solvent ink. What does this mean? It doesn't need water to dissolve, it needs another agent, and in this case it's alcohol. So this one will dissolve or smear when you use alcohol. Hence, do not use it when you do your alcohol markers or your Copic markers, because that black will smear and will do the same like the watercolor would do with other water-based inks. So there are two different things depending on what you want to use later on. That's the item you should think about using, which black ink for your outlines. This one is also good if you have a slick surface like acetate or something, or a photo where you want to stamp on. It dries fast and it's permanent and it doesn't smear on slick surfaces. So that's the one to go. But as I mentioned in the tutorial about the stems, this one also needs a special cleaner, and it is very harsh on your stems over time, and it stains them pretty good too. So just be aware. This is one I don't use that much anymore, but it is good to know what it is for. And then like I said, for all my pretty much all my stems, usually we use the regular black ink or the Memento, which is our Intense Black Exclusive Ink Pad. These two are perfect for outline stamping and coloring. So these are the black inks and a few differences. So let's have a look at our regular inks. And I just grabbed two colors here. So we have our blue and we have our green, Bluebell and Avocado. Those are two new ones. Like we said, they're both water-based. So what you can do is you can actually use them to color in an image. And you can just squeeze a little bit here with your fingers, and in the lid you will see there is ink that you can use for coloring. Never go directly with your brush and water on the ink pad itself, because when you do that, it just dilutes your water, it makes your color, it makes it really light, and you pretty much ruin your ink pad since they're watercolor based. So try not to do that. What I like to do is I just take an old block that I don't use, and then I use my ink pad and smear on it. Naturally, you could, if you have our all-purpose mat, this brown one here, you could use that one too to smear your colors on and take it off from there. I just don't want to mess with it right now because I don't want this video to be too long, and I don't want you to see me sticking to everything. So all I use is a little bit of water, and this is a regular brush, and I go into my browns, my blues. And you see I already done a little bit, and if I think it's not enough, I just add a little bit more water, and you can color in your images really nicely. And it's the same tone then your color, your cardstock. It's matching the papers maybe that you use. So there's all sorts of advantages to use this type of coloring technique. And then let's go into the green. And even so, I stamped here with the gray, and that's the regular ink. Since I'm not, this is a lot of water here, but since I'm not using a lot of water and not going back and forth and trying to avoid to get all the way to the edges, I'm fine. It doesn't harm my stamped image. But you want to be careful. The more water you use, the higher the risk is that, you know, it's gonna smear. And you can see how quickly it dissolves. And the nice thing is about these regular inks, they pretty much get absorbed by the paper. So when you stamp on something, the inks go into the paper. They don't sit just on the surface like our pigment inks do. And we get to this in a second. So, and you can even mix them, which is another nice thing. You know, if you want another green, just go ahead and mix some of the colors, and you get a totally different green. So there's a lot you can do. If you don't have any coloring tools like watercolor pencils or pencils on hand, but you just still want to give your image a little bit of color, that is a nice way to do. So now let's move on to our pigment inks. Now the difference between the pigment inks and the regular inks, and I'm using both the same colors right now here. So this is our regular water-based ink pad, and this is our pigment ink. And if I hold them up, can you see the difference? Not only the color, which is because of the type of ink it is, but as you can see here, the regular ink pad has like a fabric type of smooth surface, while the pigment ink has a spongy surface, as you can see here. And that is the first indicator. So if you're not sure what kind of ink pad you have, if it has this kind of like spongy surface, it guarantees is a pigment ink. And pigment inks, then they have different usages. So here it's a different company. It's also a white one. As you can see, it's a spongy one. So these are all Pigment Inks. I got a gold one for Christmas. It's got, as you can see, sponge surface. So most of, or that's one of the indicators. So if you're not sure and you look at your ink pad and it has that spongy consistency, then it's a pigment ink. If it has a smooth one, it is one of the others. And there are different ones, but you know, the spongy will tell you right away. And I did a couple of stamps here already. This is the thank you and stamp, and this is how it looks like when you stamp it with regular ink. So the regular water-based ink that we used here to watercolor. You can clearly see the thank and the outline. When I ink it up, first of all, you will hear it is way sticky. And you can see how much ink is on this little stamp. So when I stamp it down, you go straight down and straight up. Reason being, and I show you what can happen, I ink it up again because it is so thick and slick. If you're not careful, it easily smudges. All pigment inks will need time to dry. So if I stamp this, and you can see how shiny it is, which means it is still super wet. I usually stamp my project, put it aside, and let it sit for 24 hours at least. I don't like to heat set it. You could, because it is nice and moist and sticky still, put embossing powder over it and heat set it this way. But I just give it time to dry. And when you want to clean your stamp, that is another thing I explained in the stamp tutorial. You see the ink. You can use your chamois like I do, but you can see how much ink is on there now. And then just rinse it off. But it takes time to really thoroughly clean the stamp, because as you can see, in between those little letters is all the ink, sometimes on the block. So that's why I like to just go under the faucet and just rinse it off first and then go with the chamois. So just as a tip. Yes, you let it dry. And this one I did earlier, and you can see here I smudged it, and it's still tacky. But you can see how much the color changes. So this is what we just stamped. This is what I stamped just previously. I had to redo the video because a train was coming by and another train was coming by. And then this one was just at the beginning earlier today. So this will take a while to dry. But the nice thing is, you can see this is stamped on black. And you can see the color really nice, which will not happen if you take a regular blue ink like we did here on the white. This will not show on the black, but the pigment ink will. So that's something to keep in mind if you have dark or colored cardstock where you would like to pop something up or give it a little bit extra interest. Use some pigment inks on it. And this is the white, and my white is very old. It's even the old case still, so I think I need a new one. But you can tell it gets, the longer it sits and dries, the darker it gets. But it is really nice to see how those colors pop when you put them on dark cardstock. So that is perfect for darker colors. Now, as I explained before, I have the single pen still, the Spectrum Noir. Those are alcohol markers. And we have them in a triple pack now, which means there are 3 pieces, and they're already from light to middle to darker shade of one color. So you don't have to guess anymore which numbers you have to pick to make an even transition, because With the alcohol inks, to blend them, you need multiple colors. This being said, if I wanted to stamp these flowers and color them in with my alcohol markers, I need an outline. And I have to pick an ink that would not interfere with my alcohol markers. So since those are alcohol based, I could use any water based ink, which is my regular ink that we have, or the intense black, which is the old Memento ink. I cannot use the StazOn because the StazOn is also an alcohol based ink, and that will disappear and smudge and make a mess. So if you want to use those, you can use your regular ink pad. If you want to do watercolors, as you can see, you could use regular ink. Just be careful not to go over and over and over the image, because that will smudge at one point in time. But if you're careful, you get away with it. And if you're interested in how this really works, I will have a tutorial with the watercolor pencils that we have. They look like this, and some plain cardstock and regular ink, black ink, and you will see what you can do without having to fuzz and getting all the specials. For beginners, it's an interesting and nice thing to do. So these are our major inks. Now there are different inks on the market, and we have the one we have in the catalog new is the Distress Oxide Inks from Tim Holtz from Ranger, and they're like a hybrid. These ones are pretty thick. It's a dye and pigment ink, and when you see, it's got this flat surface, but it is a very thick ink. So if I take it off here, and you need a tool to take it off, you can see how thick this ink is compared to the old Distress inks. And I know they look alike, but this is just a Distress ink from Ranger, and this is Oxide ink. So the Distress inks, they're alcohol based, and it should say they're dye inks, and no, they're not. I always thought they were. But they're different in consistency, and they react differently to water too. I got some green on here, so and while they both look alike, these are creamier and are easier to blend with those blending tools. But what it is different is the way they react to water. And we need to wait a second. Let me let this dry for a second so you can see. And I don't know if the camera is going to pick it up, but the Oxide inks actually have a little light oxidation on there. It looks like a little bit shimmer silver a little bit. So they react to water way nicer than the old-fashioned Distress inks. But we only have the Oxide in the catalog. They're great. It's an interesting tool to do a background, to do some blending, different colors. But other than that, my main use is really our regular inks. So to give you a quick rundown, regular water-based inks, they dilute with water, so you can use them for watercoloring or coloring in your images in the same tone that your paper and your cardstock is at. The regular black ink of that series is perfect for stamping all outlines, everything that needs to be black. If you want to use Alcohol markers, you can use it with these. If you want to use watercolors, you just have to be careful not to go over the edges too much because it will dissolve. Pigment inks are thicker inks. They have this nice spongy surface. They're perfect to stamp on dark cardstock or colored cardstock, which makes them really pop. Because they're pigment, they are sitting on top of the surface of your paper. They don't seep in like the others do. So this will take longer to dry. So remember, it takes drying time. You can heat set it. You can use it with embossing powder if you want to. Just sprinkle clear embossing powder over and heat set it. These are really nice for all, like I said, dark colors or blacks, as you can see here. I love how they turn out. This is the white. And after drying time, they will get darker. If you don't get the right image right away, you might want to stamp again on top of it. Sometimes it needs 2 stamps, but usually 1 is fine. And then we have the special inks. Memento, we have now in the catalog, it is called Intense Black Exclusive Ink, which is perfect if you do watercolors or if you do alcohol markers. They will not interfere with the outline. Like everything, if you use too much water on them with the watercolors, you know, it seeps too much in the paper. It will suck a little bit and will smudge a little bit. But other than that, Memento or Intense Black Exclusive Ink, the StazOn, do not use with your alcohol markers. You can use it with anything else. Fast drying, so is the Memento or the Intense Black Ink. They will need a special cleaner to StazOn, and it is harsh on your stems, so be aware if you use it. It also will stain your stems pretty good over time, just to remember that. And then we have the Oxide Ink or the Stress Inks, which are kind of like hybrids. Like I said before, they react with water and make some really cool background and blending results depending on what you're working on. So these are pretty much the differences between the inks we have in the catalog. And like I said, if you're not sure what yours is, start with, if you can't see the label anymore, which happens, but just look at the surface of your ink pad. If it's spongy, it's likely a pigment ink. If it's something smooth, it's a water-based or alcohol ink. So that should be, you know, different than solvent ink. So just make sure to check it before you start a project. And if you want to see the colors, these are all the colors we have currently in the catalog from the regular watercolor ink pads. And there are a couple that have the pigment inks as well in there. So our new, the Bluebell, has a pigment ink. The black comes in pigment. The white, naturally. There's an espresso. So they're only here and there. There's the clover, green, the sapphire, the candied. And I think that's it. So there are a couple of the pigment inks in here, and you find them on page 98 and 99. The hybrid and the new ones are those Oxide inks from Tim Holtz on Ranger. They're on page 80. Like everywhere currently, due to all the issues with the ports and the customs and everything, they're coming in, and as soon as the shipment comes in, they're sold out. So be patient. If you go to any of the other stores, they have the same issue. You might not get them all, but these are the colors we have right now in the program, and I hope that in a couple of weeks they should be all back in stock again. Same as with those glossy sprays, but we will do this at a different time. And then here we have the different inks again. So an archival ink, and it tells you it's waterproof, light, fast-proof, archival, deepest black. You can use it for vellum. You can also use the StazOn for vellum. So if you want a really nice intense black, I would suggest use the intense black. If you're not happy with the regular one, like I said, for 99% of the time I use the regular one. It's good with watercolors and alcohol markers. And then we have the StazOn. That is for non-porous materials like plastic, metal, glass, coated paper like your photographs. Not for fabrics, but for anything else that has a slick surface. So this is great, but it needs a special cleaner. And that is on page 76 in the catalog. So I hope that little insight into the world of inks helps you better to decide which ones you want, if you even want to deal with the pigment inks or not. I always think a white one is a good one to have because it goes great on any dark colored cardstock. It is nice for doing snowflakes on a dark blue background. It is nice chalky charcoal, you know, chalk effect on black, as you can see here. But even some of the lighter colors like this bluebell is really nice. And this is our julep from last year's color of the year, and I think it just needs another stamp maybe, but depending on how you look at it, you can see how shiny it is. It's chalky, looks great. So these are the different types, and I will see that I get this on in the link down below too, so you see the difference between the different black inks. I think that might help for you to decide too, because I know there's always the question, which one do I use? Thanks for listening, and I hope you learned a little bit from all these different ink types. And if you have questions, just give me a holler. Otherwise, I will see you back next week, and I think I will be talking a little bit about cutting tools. So get your paper trimmers out. If you have questions, send them ahead of the video. That way I can explain them during the show too. All right. Thank you. Have a nice weekend, and talk to you next week. Bye-bye.